Hey, so this is a video about a subject that I feel very strongly about. The video is not a rant because I'm relatively calm right now, but that's actually why I want to make it at this exact moment because I'm thinking clearly and I can articulate myself in a clear way. The truth is, this is a subject that does really get to me sometimes, and in those sort of situations, I do want to vent, but perhaps I wouldn't articulate myself as well as I would like. I want to talk about the subject of a particular type of antisocial behavior, but it goes much deeper and darker than that, and it's difficult to categorize it in one sort of way. But I'm talking about situations where you have a mob or a gang attacking an individual. The pretext of this, I should say, is a report that I've read about a schoolboy from Bradford, West Yorkshire, who, 14 years old, was attacked by a 15 strong mob. May have been recently, may have been a few years ago, I don't really know. I don't want to give the impression that such incidents are very common, but they are all too common in this country and elsewhere. Um, Crime is one of the subjects that I have very black and white views on. I am not particularly objective on this issue. I'm very subjective, and I do not deny that, because I have had personal experience of the impact that this sort of antisocial behavior has. Now, I've never been beaten up by 15 people, but I have been attacked by thugs for no reason. Minding my own business, I've had guys just attack me. Almost had a dislocated jaw once just for nothing, just because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when you have that sort of persistent antisocial behavior, it's the problem I have with the terminology antisocial behavior is it really trivializes the impact that this thing can have. Um, in worst case scenarios, it can lead to death, whether through suicide because people have just had too much, and there have been documented cases of that happening, or actual death because someone has been murdered. Whether it be in an arson attack or in cold blood, point blank. It's a problem that I believe is very serious, and in my view, it is one of the worst sorts of crime. I mean, we rightly view rape and paedophilia and so on as very serious crimes, which they are, of course. But we should also view antisocial behaviour really in much stronger terms than I believe that we currently do, because for far too often in this country, and I'm not going to speak at length about other countries because I'm not 100% sure about the situation, but far too often in Britain we talk about antisocial behaviour like it's so-called trivial crime, like it's a nuisance, it's annoying. It's much worse than that. It is a quality of life infraction. It it ruins a potential quality of life, and it's it's a terrible thing, really. But I want to talk specifically about that issue of when gangs act in this sort of pack mentality. It's bad enough if you have an individual who's drunk or on drugs or whatever, attacks a stranger for no reason. That's bad enough. But when you have that sort of mob mentality, frankly, I find it terrifying. I find it terrifying that people could be so primitive that they could resort to that sort of behavior for nothing, for absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever. In this particular case in Bradford, supposedly the victim had said something about the mother of one of the attackers, but this is, even if that is the case, to have 15 people on one person is sickening. I'm not going to mince my words here. I think they're the scum of the earth. I think anyone who gets into a pack like that, into a mob, is the absolute scum of the earth. I think they're nothing but worthless cards. And frankly, I cannot think of enough adjectives to describe what I think of such people. And I know it's not politically correct, but I don't care. I hate them. And I believe only severe punishment is appropriate in such cases. I actually would be open to the concept of corporal punishment. I'm not saying that should be the way, but I'm saying there should at least be debate about it. Because you have crimes that are so damaging to someone's psyche, to the victim's psyche, that really the only punishment that's appropriate is one that really matches the level of the crime. And in such cases, community sentences are a bad joke. Um, I'm not going to get into the psychology of what these people think because, frankly, I can't even begin to understand it. You know, people could say they're from broken homes, they have bad education, all the rest of it. There's certainly truth in that, but my problem with always trying to find an explanation for criminal behavior is sometimes that morphs into sympathy for criminal behavior. And I know people deny this, but it inevitably does. Social workers and youth workers will always say, oh, but we're not making excuses. Well, actually, you are. That really is what you're doing. You're presenting the situation that a certain person has experienced, and you're basically saying it's society's fault. Society should feel guilty, and society should sort it out. There's no concept of responsibility whatsoever. But you can argue as much as you want about these people, you know, being influenced by their parents and whatever. That's all. There's truth in that, but ultimately there has to be justice. And I am a staunch believer that you cannot have justice without punishment. You just can't. This is why, to be quite honest, I find it very difficult to stay patient with neoliberal thinking on this. Some people say hard left or far left thinking. Actually, the far left is probably more aligned to right wing thinking than neoliberals are. Because if you look at communist countries, you know, they don't mess around when it comes to crime. So it's not necessarily a problem with the hard left, it's a problem with neoliberals. Um, I would cite some examples in the UK, the likes of the Green Party. Um, the Lib Dems, I think, have improved a little bit. I think they're a bit more in touch now with reality, but for a while they were also guilty of underestimating the impact of crime. The Greens, as far as I'm concerned, are just completely irresponsible on this issue. The Greens, if they had their way, would allow such violent thugs to basically walk free. And I think not only is that immoral, it's downright irresponsible. Of course, you can have debates about reform in prison, etc. That's important. There is absolutely space for that, and there should be. But what angers me is that some people just lose sight of the basic principle of fairness. And when you have people terrorizing other members of society in this way, there has to be consequences. There has to be. Neoliberals just can't grasp that. They just cannot get it into their head that when someone does something that heinous, when they terrorize another person, and that's what it is, there has to be consequences. Um, Personally, I would have no problem with getting the entire mob, putting them in pinstriped prison suits, and making them break rocks all day. I really do think that you need to have a situation where, actually, I would have a situation where I'd have an army corporal or a heavyweight boxer or someone that will scare the shit out of these people and say, you're not a man. This is not what real men do. Real men do not work in a gang. That is the action of a worthless, low life, despicable, loathsome little card. And this is why I staunchly believe that gang culture, whenever it's glamorized, that needs to be called out. Rappers need to start getting their shit together, to use their language, and taking some damn responsibility because they're largely responsible for promoting gang culture. I defy anyone to say otherwise. That's what they do. I'm not saying every rapper does that, but it is inherent in rap and R&B culture, glamorizing. Um, there's no values at all. There's no virtue. There's no moral code whatsoever. It is just about who has the most turf, who is most menacing to society. That's what it's about, and it's sickening. Um, Incidentally, this is often, you know, people could say I'm really right wing. Maybe I am on the subject. To me, it's not about being right wing. It's about common sense. It's about fairness. It's This shouldn't be a party political issue. It shouldn't be the left right pendulum. It should be an issue of common sense. When you have a pack of 15 thugs mercilessly beating an individual, they need to face consequences. And sadly, in most of these cases, it only ends up that one or two of them actually get arrested, the ringleaders, so the other worthless cards can go and slink away, not face responsibility. Um, I know, I appreciate it's difficult to police these things. I'm not having a go at the police because they have a very difficult job, and I appreciate that, if the victim is in that sort of situation, it's very difficult for them to identify the worthless cards who do this. But we can start by absolutely putting pressure on anyone who glamorizes this lifestyle. It should be public taboo. We have freedom of expression, but people who promote this basically it needs to be a stigma. It needs to be seen as something that is, you promote it, yeah, you're just as bad as they are. You may not be throwing the punches, you may not be doing that, but you're just as bad as they are. People can call me old fashioned. I don't care. I believe in this very strongly because I have seen the consequences that this has. And this shouldn't happen anywhere in the world, but we call ourselves a developed country. We call ourselves a civilized country. I cannot even begin to imagine the fear, the mental impact, the mental anguish, which is something that's often underestimated, this can have on a victim. And I don't care who that person is. Um, Even if it's not a gang member, when you have a mob attacking an individual, they are automatically at fault, no matter what. And if the individual's being accused of something, then the police have a responsibility to arrest them. But I think mob mentality is sickening. I really, really, really have a problem with it. And I have a big problem with people who cannot get it into their heads that such behavior needs consequences. And it's not that I enjoy feeling angry about these things, but anger motivates. And I do have very strong views on this. So I'm going to round this up. I don't see this video as a rant. I see it as kind of promoting my argument on this. And I know these are views shared by millions and millions of people out there. Um, what bothers me, though, is that neoliberals present people like me as extremists. But who is the real extremist? Those who are saying that there has to be consequences for this basically terrorizing behavior. I'm not going to say terrorist, this is not ideologically driven, but terrorizing behavior. Those who just want there to be fairness and consequences, or those who are basically saying that it's society's fault and society should feel sorry for them, and who are basically saying that such individuals should not be behind bars to protect the public. Where is the extremism, I ask you? So when the Greens are basically opposed to prison, as far as I'm concerned, that is an extremist position. It's not a moderate position at all. It's not a reasonable position. It's not a sensible position. It's extreme. It's downright stupid. And in my view, if we're going to get into the moral issue, yes, it is immoral because you're robbing justice from victims of crime and they should be ashamed of themselves. That's why I will never vote Green because, and I'm just using them as a prominent example because they have done quite well in the last election, and they probably right now are the most prominent neoliberal party in Britain. The Liberal Democrats are centre left. I don't see them as neoliberal in the same way, although they are too much to the left for me right now. But as for the Labour Party, again, people sometimes those on the right think that being soft on crime and being apathetic to crime is a domain of the hard left. Actually, you'll probably find the hard left would agree with you on this. Um, Very often, communist leaders are some of the most outspoken in being tough on crime. So it's not an issue of hard left; it's more an issue of neoliberalism in that sense. And I've no time for it at all. I've no respect for it. I've no time for it. We have this nonsense sometimes about respect everyone's opinions. There's certain opinions you can't respect. And if you're a sincere and honest person, you can't respect certain opinions because respecting certain opinions basically means you're being insincere yourself. It doesn't mean get into someone's face and yell at them because you disagree. Of course not. But, if I met such a person and they said that they didn't think such people would be in prison, I would be prepared for a very robust debate with them on that. Either that or I'd walk away because I wouldn't trust myself to basically lose my temper. Um, it's tolerance gets thrown around a lot. There are certain things as a society we shouldn't tolerate, and that's one of them. Um, so I think the police should have absolute support to do what is necessary to bring these people to justice, to arrest them. I only use that as one example. Unfortunately, there's many other examples in this country and elsewhere. I'm not talking so much about one-on-one street fights, and I'm not a fan of that, by the way. I think it's reckless. I think the only time people should get involved in street fights is in a necessary case of self-defense. There are certain situations, like say you get two guys who are fighting over a woman. Okay, it's pretty stupid, but to me that doesn't bother me anywhere near as much as seeing a pack of 15 thugs beat up an individual. I don't particularly like street fights. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's detrimental to society. But if it's one on one, at least it's one on one. When you get a pack of, I mean, I really do believe that you need a sort of situation where they know that there's going to be consequences, and that shouldn't be a tap on the wrist. They should have. I'm not talking necessarily about doing the same thing to them, of course not, but there needs to be consequences. Um, there was that American concept, scared straight. Now, I appreciate that's controversial, but I really do think in some cases it's the only way, because you get certain types of criminals, jobs, as we would say in this country, who literally laugh at community sentences. They just don't care. And the only thing that will make them even begin to consider changing their ways is to scare the shit out of them. Fight fire with fire. Some people call that revenge. I call it common sense. You cannot change these people by just kind of sitting down with a cup of tea and saying, oh, you need to think about changing your ways. They don't think like that. They just don't. I know. I've experienced such people. I know how they think because I've had 2 years of them. I know what it's like. So that's all I'm going to say. I'll round this up. I spoke a bit longer than I intended, but it's a very, very important issue. It still plagues this country. I'm not going to throw out statistics. I'm not going to say if it's better or worse than before, but it's a big, big problem. And I will support any politician who talks tough on this particular issue because I have very strong views on it, as you can tell. Thanks for watching.